Hey guys, welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to the second part of Historian Reacts to a brief political history of Puerto Rico. Um, we've already done the very first 6 minutes, more or less, of this video. I may uh, skip some parts because it's a long video and I don't want to I don't want to discuss everything in the video. I've been discussing more or less the parts that I was interested in, and we're getting to other ones um, that are very interesting. So, like I think we're gonna be able to discuss the Grito Lares, the Spanish American, the Spanish Cuban American War, and a few other things. Um, I hope that we can get to discuss. So how about it? Let's get started on this part two, this second episode of this very long video about the history of Puerto Rico.
In 1837, a constitutional monarchy was established in Spain. However, Spanish lawmakers argued that the colonies were not true Spanish provinces and therefore should be governed by special laws. For more than 3 decades, Puerto Ricans waited for the despotic rule of military colonialism.
Not only for 3 decades did they wait for this, but we're still waiting for the supposed special laws that they were gonna pass, and it's a little bit more complex than just this, right? Um, there is all of these special laws. They start being offered to Puerto Rico after or around the time of El Grito Lares, which she's gonna get to. Um, but they never materialized. So in essence, it was like just this little carrot that was waved in front of Puerto Ricans, um, to to keep them loyal to the crown. And there's a lot of arguments that can be said in terms of the status question in now in the 21st century and then later in the 20th century. This is the 19th century. So there's a lot of parallels there between the special laws and autonomy and then subsequent treatment or relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. So just wanted to highlight that.
The despotic rule of military colonial governors to loosen. During that period, 3 political positions crystallized in the island. Those who wanted assimilation into the Spanish government and representation in the Cortes, the conservatives who favored the status quo, and the smallest of all, those who advocated complete independence. Even the token.
This is still the way that Puerto Rican society, or at least Puerto Rican politics, is divided as the the main group right now that wants to become a state of the United States, those that prefer the status quo and remain a territory of the United States, a colony of the United States, and those who would prefer independence. In theory, if you group the percentages of those that favor the number 1 and number 3, that will be the majority of the population. So there is a consensus of wanting to change, but then it's how do we change? So that is still the question that's still lingering in Puerto Rican society and Puerto Rican politics still to this day.
Token levels of self-government were repressed when inconvenient. When a local commission suggested the abolition of slavery, the colonial government saw it as a potential brewing rebellion and immediately arrested the more outspoken leaders and sent them to Spain for a trial. This backfired as it led to an actual rebellion led by Ramón Emeterio Betances on September 23, 1868. Known as the Grito de Lares, it began as a meeting in a farm owned by a Venezuelan-born rebel, Manuel Rojas.
Okay, a little bit of context on this. Number one, El Grito Lares Yes, there is a slavery, an abolition. Ramon Emeterio Betances brings up the ideals of the French Revolution, and he was in France, so he has been he lived in Paris for a while. He has this um, he had contact with the Enlightenment, or uh, with with philosophers and thinkers of of France of the early 1900s, uh, early 19th. I'm sorry, of the early 1800s, the 19th early 19th century. Um, so yes, the abolition of slavery was indeed one of a few others um, reasons, but it's not. It's not. It's not as the. It's not. Slavery wasn't the main focus of the rebellion. The main focus of the rebellion was to declare independence and establish a republic, and yes, slavery was part of that, but it wasn't the main driving force. It's not like, for example, the United States Civil War, that slavery is the issue. Slavery is what sparks the South to secede and to claim states' rights. It's that was the spark. In this case, there were a lot of other things, a lot of other context that was happening um, in the island. There was a massive there were during the first, like I said, during the first 30 years of the 1800s, there was this fear, this very real fear of slave revolts being uh, being promoted by Haiti, from Haiti, from Haiti, um, and that was a real fear that existed in that time. So there was a lot of other different things. Again, there was once Puerto Ricans had enjoyed certain rights, certain privileges during the time that the Cortes de Cádiz was in charge of the Spanish government. Um, those freedoms, when you taste freedom, you want more of it. You want to keep it. So in this case, that is what is the main driving point. Yes, slavery is an issue, but it's not the issue. So in this case, the presentation of this is not correct. Um, also, also, um, the Grito Lares, he's gonna go into this, and he correctly says that they took Lares without any issue. The the Spanish government knew about the plans prior to the events happening. Ramon Emeterio de Batanzas isn't even in Puerto Rico. He was, if I'm not mistaken, in Santo Domingo, which by the time by the mid 19th century is already independent. He's in Santo Domingo, trying to send weapons and coordinate the entrance of weapons into Puerto Rico from Santo Domingo. Those weapons cages are actually confiscated by, if I'm not mistaken, British authorities in the Virgin Islands. Um, I think it's in St. Thomas. Um, and then I'm not sure if it's the British right at this moment, or if it's the Swedish government, but it's not the Spanish government. If maybe if I remember correctly, those weapons were confiscated in St. Thomas. There were a lot of leaks. It's a very uh, mediocre set of events that led to this bad luck of situations. So the weapons are discovered. Two members of the conspiracy actually are are overheard in, I think it's in Arecibo, and another one is arrested, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, in Yauco. So again, all these things are happening. The Grito de Lares had was being coordinated so that it would happen in or at the same time as the Grito de Yara, which launched a very successful ish 10-year war of independence for Cuba. The first one, not the second one. The second one happens in the late 1890s, and that is what develops into the Spanish American War. It's not just 1898, it's a longer war. It's just that the end of that war is part, or the Spanish American War is part of the Cuban War of Independence. So all these things are happening in the middle of the 19th century, when the Grito de Lares in it's 1863, if I'm not mistaken, happens. So yeah, there was no way that that was going to be successful. There's he glasses over this. There are at least two other attempts to declare, to actually, there's two more uprisings. There's one that is called El Grito Yauco, that is actually more successful than Lares. It lasted a whole week. Grito Lares lasted 48 hours. And all of the, and he'll get into it. All of the conspirators were caught. They were jailed, and then they were later let go. And really, Spain was already on its way. The Spanish. There was already this understanding that there had to be some changes in the way that Spain, and Spain's relationship with its few remaining possessions, and those special laws are not. Or at least this is my opinion, as a historian, and I know that there other historians might disagree with me on this, but for me, the special laws and these different concessions that happen, they weren't a result of El Grito de Lares, more than just something that would have happened eventually, Grito de Lares or not. But that's just my opinion, and honestly, there is evidence to suggest that that is the case, and there's also evidence to suggest that the traditional sense that El Grito de Lares is this mythical, so this pivotal event in Puerto Rican history, that where Puerto Rico finally declared its independence from Spain. Yes, that did happen, but it was quashed in less than 48 hours. No other country in the world recognized Puerto Rico as independent. It was just a minor blip in Spain's radar. They know that there wasn't a protracted war where Spain had to send more resources and have to deal with two rebellions at the same time. I think, and this is just a what if scenario, an alternate history, had El Grito de Lares been actually successful, had maybe the weapons cages not been found, and none of these other things gone wrong, it could be possible that Puerto Rico, and actually Cuba's independence, might have been achieved during that original 10 years war. But again, it's speculation, because that did not happen. So Spain was free to focus on Cuba, which was a larger, more rich territory, versus Puerto Rico, that was just seen as a more yes, it was productive. It had one of the best coffees in the world at this time. During the 19th century, Puerto Rico actually does become one of the top coffee producers in the world, but it was seen more mostly as a military outpost than anything else.
That evening, over 600 men and women marched defiantly on the small town of Lares, near Mayagüez, where they were met with minimal Spanish resistance. There, they hoisted the rebel flag and declared Puerto Rico a republic. Fatefully, the glory wasn't to last. Electing next to march on the nearby town of San Sebastián, the poorly armed Liberation Army walked into a classic Spanish military trap and were quickly seen off by superior firepower. A handful of the militia were killed by Spanish bullets, while hundreds more, including the main leaders, were taken prisoner. While the Grito de Lares was decapitated swiftly and never won widespread grassroots support on the island,
That's correct.
the action did lead to some long-term political concessions.
Like I said,
In the years that
that's
followed,
not
the
necessarily
colonial
correct.
authorities passed liberal electoral reforms, granted Puerto Rico provincial status, and offered Spanish citizenship. During the
That like I said, that's not technically correct. And provincial status back then, it's not like it's still it's more like still a territory of Spain, still a colony. It wasn't Spain a part of Spain on its own right. Um, it's just a very weird issue, the way that he's presenting it. Like, we became a province of Spain. That's not completely accurate either.
1880s, Román Valdoriotti de Castro led a movement for political autonomy under Spanish rule. The movement faced violent suppression, but its treatment only solidified its popular support. And in 1897, the Autonomy Party was formed in Puerto Rico through cooperation with the Liberal Party in Spain. This gained the island a proposed new autonomous government, parliamentary in form, overseen by the Governor-General as a representative of the Spanish king, where the two-chamber parliament was responsible for local legislation.
Okay, so this is where the theory that Puerto Rico is a province falls apart. Spain would have never granted any type of autonomy to a province, none whatsoever. Puerto Rico was seen more as this territory, faraway territory, and it was just easier to deal with granting them a few a limited autonomy, because when you see there, the governor is not elected. So yes, there's this parliament. It's more akin to what Spanish provinces today have. So back then, the provinces didn't have a local parliament. Now, Barcelona has a small local parliament, and so does every other province. But this might be the genesis of all that, of Spain trying to figure this out. But this doesn't last. This is in 1897. The government is established 1 week before the American invasion, and by then there was a state of war in Puerto Rico, and it just never happened.
Tariffs and taxes. The proposal ended up being moot, however, because the Spanish-American War prevented Puerto Ricans from instituting their new government. Instead, a war in 1898 that had been building for a while, the causes of which had little to do with Puerto Rico itself, ended up dramatically changing the path of the island, as the decisive American victory over the Spanish turned Puerto Rico, along with Cuba, the Philippines, and Guam, into an American possession. The U.S. most cared about the strategic value of the island, especially as a
Mm-hmm.
coaling station for its ships and as a way to secure the building of a future Panama Canal.
Yep.
That is part of the reason why Puerto Rico became a permanent U.S. territory, but it was not the only one. The other is that, unlike Cuba, there was no organized opposition in the halls of power to its annexation, either prior to the war or after. In the Cuban case, for instance, Congress had passed the Teller Amendment, a law that made it clear the U.S. could not attempt to annex Cuba in case of a war.
Mm-hmm.
This, in turn, resulted from the fact that Cuba had a much larger population, and some in Congress were worried Cuba might compete with the mainland's economic 100. In
Mm-hmm.
this way, for roughly the next 50 years, the main debate revolved around how much limited power the United States should grant Puerto Rico rather than under what circumstances it should grant it independence.
Yep, that's correct.
That's because while there was some support among Puerto Ricans for independence, the U.S. government never really considered it. One of the most important men to
And
champion the Puerto
and by
Rican
the
cause.
way, by the early 1900s, majority of Puerto Ricans favored annexation. That they favored statehood. The two main political parties, the Republican Party and the, I want to say Liberal Party, but I know that it has another name. And the Liberal Party both favored statehood. That changes very quickly, but we're talking 1900, 1901, 1902. That area, both of them favored statehood. That would change dramatically afterwards because of this gentleman he's going to introduce soon.
In this early debate was Luis Muñoz Rivera, a man that had been fighting for autonomy for the island since the 1880s. As a writer and resident commissioner, he was instrumental in the passing of the Jones-Shaffer Act of 1917. Signed by Woodrow Wilson, the act granted Puerto Ricans U.S. citizenship, created a local civilian government that would be appointed by the president, and created Puerto Rican government bonds, which would be triply free of taxation.
It's I this part I enjoy from this video. I love that he doesn't say at any moment that Puerto Ricans were given were imposed the U.S. citizenship because they needed us to go fight the war in the Great War. This is actually a process that that ends up coinciding with the war. But Puerto Ricans were already serving in the armed forces way before in the United States Armed Forces way before 1917, and again, the citizenship was something that had been worked that both parties, both of those early parties, were working on towards, and it just coincides with the entry of the United States into for World War One.
An issue that would become quite relevant some decades hence. The act did not end the debate about the island's status. On the contrary, it intensified it, defining the political careers of two major figures who would emerge on the island in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Pedro Albizu Campos, leader of the pro-independence Partido Nacionalista or Nationalist Party, and Luis Muñoz Marín, son of Muñoz Rivera,
Both
and the person who
independentistas.
established the Partido Popular Democrático, or PPD.
Okay, so both of these, Luis Muñoz Marin was an independentista. He was a pro-independence. He just decides to play. He stops being an independentista to in the hopes of improving, trying to get better relations and better relations in Washington. Um, there's something that needs to be said about Pedro Albizu Campos and the nationalists. They are very closely linked with Spanish Franquists, Spanish nationalists, in the sense that you'll see a lot of the symbols of fascism, the use of black shirts, the cross in their logo, and there's a lot of other similarities between what we can call proto-fascists in Puerto Rico, that were the nationalists, versus fascists in Spain and Italy.
Popular Democratic Party in 1938. Alcibú and the Partido Nacionalista advocated radical politics in the name of independence, and as a result of American repression. In the following decades, it would be involved in multiple uprisings, killing of police officers, and attempted assassinations. One of the most important early ones was the Ponce Massacre, an event that took place on March 21, 1937, where police opened fire on a march organized by the Nationalists, killing 19 and wounding
Which,
over 200 people.
which I mean, the police had no reason to shoot at them. Um, that was just a bad call on their part. The nationalists had no guns. They were marching. They were marching with wooden, make believe weapons, wood, just pieces of wood. Cadets would use. Um, that was just a string of errors, one after the other, that resulted in this massacre.
During the same period, the more conciliatory side, led by Muñoz Marín, pressed for a plebiscite to allow Puerto Ricans to choose between statehood and independence. Having begun on the pro-independence side,
See, this is something. Again, um, he jumps over a lot of things. The plebiscite in 1951 wasn't between statehood or independence. It was actually to say yes or no. Does Puerto Rico want to have its own constitution? That's the question that is up in the 1951 plebiscite. I think he's talking about the 63 or 60 something. This the first plebiscite that is actually done in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken, maybe the 70s. But again, the, during the time of the that doesn't happen during the time of the nationalists. The that what happens is the after 48, when he's elected, that's the very first Puerto Rican to be elected as a governor, not the very first Puerto Rican to serve, but elected. um, they get they go to the United States, to Washington D.C., and they start negotiating into trying to get more autonomy for the island, and then they do it, and then Congress passes Law 600, which authorizes Puerto Rico to create a constitution to have a semblance of government for local affairs. Something sort of similar to what was done by Spain before the Spanish-American War. So again, the it's still a territory. That term Commonwealth is not a legal term per se. Virginia is a Commonwealth, but it's a state. And Pennsylvania is a Commonwealth, and it is a state. So again, that term Commonwealth is not the correct term. Would be territory or colony.
the PPD evolved in response to the American position, and under Muñoz Marín leadership, Congress granted Commonwealth status to Puerto Rico, the same status it still holds.
Mm-hmm.
This intended to give the island more political autonomy, despite close ties with the United States.
But again, you mentioned, or he mentions, a plebiscite between statehood and independence, and that doesn't happen in 1951 or 1952. That the 1951 and 1952 plebiscites are, number one, to ask the Puerto Ricans if they want to have a constitution, and then to say yes or no to the drafted or proposed constitution.
In practice, it meant that while those living in the island could elect their own representatives and have say in local matters, they could not do the same for the U.S. government. In effect, Puerto Rico would become a protectorate with the benefit that most Puerto Ricans would be exempt from paying federal taxes.
Puerto Rico, the use of the word protectorate, it could imply that Puerto Rico is an independent country, and that's not correct. Um, Puerto Rico would that the correct way to say is that Puerto Rico would be granted a level of self government, or a more organized territorial government, um, that is approved and respondent to the residents of the territory. But the use of the word protectorate, it's, I know I'm being picky, but it's still, I wouldn't use it. I mean, I think there's other ways to explain it.
In 1952, this status description was approved by a referendum held on the island. Voters also approved Puerto Rico's first constitution that was written by islanders. Muñoz Marín became the first elected governor of Puerto Rico.
Yes, but that did not happen in 1952. Like I said, Muñoz Marín was elected the very first, and he wasn't the very first governor, the very first Puerto Rican governor. He was the very first elected Puerto Rican governor, and that happens in 48. That does not happen in 52.
The new status and newly granted U.S. citizenship for Puerto Ricans led to what is commonly known as the Great Migration. Attracted to better economic opportunities in the U.S., Puerto Ricans left the island by the tens of thousands. In 1953 alone, an estimated 75,000 Puerto Ricans arrived in New York City.
Promoted by the Muñoz Marín government, by the way. It was the Muñoz Marín government promoted this. It wasn't just natural. It was promoted by the government because there were already Puerto Ricans going to the United States since the 1900s. Let's just early 20th century. Puerto Ricans were already going. This migration, on the other hand, is promoted by the new territorial government led by Luis Muñoz Marín.
Not everyone was happy with this arrangement, particularly the nationalists. In October 1950, they attempted an insurrection with simultaneous uprisings in several points in the island, including Arecibo, Jayuya, and San Juan.
Let's check that date correctly, because if I'm not mistaken, that actually happened in 1951. Alrighty, so yes, it is in fact in October 30th, 1950, and it starts in Jayuya. Okay, I just wanted to double check, be completely right. I originally thought that this was actually 1951 because it's in 1952. They were revolting. This uprising is this happens because already the government was saying that they wanted to create this constitution, and the nationalists correctly, I may add, said that if that happened, Puerto Rico would never be independent, at least in the short term.
The most successful was in Jayuya, where nationalists held the town for several days, while in San Juan they attempted to enter the governor's mansion, but it only resulted in the death of the attackers. Later that year, Griselio Torresola and Oscar Collazo also tried to assassinate President Truman while he stayed at the Blair House in D.C. They failed, but killed one police officer. The most well-known incident, however, was the 1954 United States Capitol shooting, when Lolita Lebrón, Rafael Cancel Miranda, Andrés Figueroa Cordero, and Irving Flores Rodriguez unfurled a Puerto Rican flag and began shooting at representatives in the 83rd Congress
And they killed
who were debating an immigration bill.
No.
5 representatives were wounded, one seriously, but all recovered. In both cases, the Puerto Rican nationalists were imprisoned and then pardoned decades later. Since these violent events took place, a number of plebiscites have been held, in theory to allow the Puerto Ricans to decide the future of the island's status. but these have never been congressionally mandated, meaning that whatever the outcome, it would still be up to Congress.
Okay, so the use of congressionally mandated, it's a it's a it shouldn't be used. In the entire history of territories becoming states in the United States Federation, no plebiscite has ever been congressionally mandated. They're the only referendums that are congressionally mandated are when statehood has already been approved, and then the Congress says, okay, so yes or no, final vote, statehood, yes or no, that you're or do you want this law to be approved, yes or no? But in the initial plebiscites and referendums, have never been congressionally mandated. And if I'm not mistaken, when the Philippines, the Philippines did I may have it wrong. Just leave it in the comments if I have this fact wrong. But if I'm not mistaken, when the Philippines created or went to ask for to declare their independence, their plebiscite wasn't federally mandated.
To ratify or not that decision. These have been held in 1967, 1993, 1998, 2012, 2017, and 2020. 5 of those have given voters some sort of choice between independence, the status quo, or statehood, and only the last one asked a simple yes or no question as to whether Puerto Rico should become a state. Voters rejected the status change in 1967, 1993, and 1998. The 2012 election results were unclear because some voters did not answer both parts of a 2-part statehood question.
And honestly, that's an excuse. It was one part was not linked to the other. The question was, do you agree with something like in English was something, do you agree with do you agree that Puerto Rico should remain as a territory of the United States, yes or no? And regardless of what you voted up in the other question, which would be your preferred status? So if you left that in blank, it was just that blank. You have no option. You were saying you didn't have any opinion. You didn't want to choose of any of these 3 different options that were free associated state, independence, and statehood. In the American system, if you leave it in blank, it's just blank. It doesn't mean anything. It actually means that you're allowing somebody else to decide for you. So that to say that the 2012 election results were unclear, they were clear. No to the territory and a 63% approval of statehood. It's there. It's 61.3% of statehood. So again, it is very clear. And if you look at, I agree with what he says about the 2017 one. But if you look a little bit farther, last year's plebiscite, again, very close to the 61.3. The difference being that around 100,000 people moved to the United States, and more than 100,000 people, have moved from the United States. Puerto Rico's lost population, so that could be an explanation as to why there's a difference of a few percentage points, but it's still way above the 51% needed. Just saying. And anyways, let's see how he finishes this.
And while in 2017, statehood won decisively, It was because of a
Yeah,
boycott
it
that
was
led to a
boycotted.
very low turnout,
That's correct.
around 23%.
Yeah,
Only in
that
2020
plebiscite
did voters
was
choose
a
a clear
joke.
preference, with 52.3% opting for statehood.
That is correct.
Congress has discussed the issue several times. In 1998, Congress acknowledged that the current status was no longer viable. Don Young of Alaska introduced a bill that called for a plebiscite on the island that had only the statehood or independence options. While it was approved in the House by a narrow margin, the Senate never seriously considered it. The House passed something similar in 2010, and the Senate again ignored it. Since then, it has been introduced in every Congress, and it will probably pass the House again, but the odds remain very low in the Senate. This is because Puerto Rican statehood has become a partisan issue, as it might mean 2 new Democratic senators in Congress.
Okay, so this is gonna be the last comment of that I will do about this video. The other 5 minutes, it's just some laughable things, and I don't even want to go there. Um, I really have never understood why, but there's this misconception that Puerto Ricans are all liberal, and that's not correct. Yes, you're gonna find very progressive and very liberal people living in the metro area, but the farther away you get from the metro area, the more conservative people get. So this misnomer of, well, it's gonna be a solid blue state, I wouldn't bet on it. I personally wouldn't bet on it. So yeah, this has been part two. I hope that you've enjoyed this series, and just we'll be uploading other types of reactions and other types of comments and blogging here. Don't forget to check out my podcast, Historiando. It's in Spanish. Hopefully you can understand it. Um, it's in the link is in the description, and also in the in the channel information. It's in Spotify. So just leave your comments below, like and subscribe, and we'll see you later.